So, as I'm well aware everybody and their dog knows at this point, Microsoft has purchased ZeniMax. So now they possess not only Fallout, which if you saw this video here, you should know that I'm a huge fan of, but also Doom and Wolfenstein and Quake and all of this other stuff. I went over exactly what their adaptation meant in last week's video, and if you didn't see that, you can click this link right here in the eyeball. But my point is, this is massive news, and that's why you know about it. The thing is, though, this isn't just news for Microsoft and the Xbox team in general. It's also massive news for fans of the Fallout, Elder Scrolls, and soon-to-be-created Starfield franchises, of which I am. Let me explain. As a fan of video games and their happenings, I found myself actually pretty frightened at the sight of this news. I mean, for example, take a look at EA and what they do to companies that they acquire, or what happened to Blizzard after their acquisition by Activision. Beyond that, look no further than Microsoft's approach to the acquisition of Rare.
But look at Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts. What did they do to Banjo? My boy looks like a diabetic!
I've mentioned this before, and people bring it up all the time, but it was horrendous. But it has now dawned on me that this is different. If we look a little bit further than just the headlines I brought up in last week's video, I think there is a pretty all-around explanation as to why all this is happening, and here's what I think. I think it's pretty fair to say that, yeah, Microsoft has been around the block quite a few times. And as such, unless you're Nintendo marketing a console that focuses on your exclusives exclusively, it's more trouble than it's worth to actually pump out good exclusive games. Or at least this is what Microsoft showed that they thought in the last console generation. They showed us just how much money they were willing to pay to get games made for their platform, and I criticized them for that. So what's different about this? Well, not very much, to be honest. To be frank with you, the thing is, a few months ago when I bashed them for doing these things, was because I was under the impression that when this happened, Microsoft basically just pulled a Rare and is going to strong-arm them into doing whatever the main studio decided not to do. But I gotta admit, I don't see that happening with the ZeniMax team, and especially not Todd Howard and his Bethesda boys. But I'm getting way ahead of myself at this point. My point is, when it comes to the Xbox, Microsoft has always known that they were in second place to someone, whether it was the PS2 or the Wii or whatever. Microsoft hasn't been king, and that's because they never really had to be. This day, Microsoft is one of the world's largest companies. We went over their net worth at the time of the Xbox's launch a few months ago.
Anyways, fast forward a bit to 2001, and Microsoft as a whole is worth over $500 billion.
And if you remember those details, you should be able to tell that to Microsoft, a couple $100 million wasn't much in the grand scheme of things. And at first, Bill Gates was reportedly against the whole idea. My point is, back in the day, Microsoft didn't need the 360 to make a profit, lest they file for bankruptcy. The Xbox project was merely a hobby. You know? A sweaty, expensive, Dorito-crusted hobby. It is because of this hobby-ish stance that Microsoft has towards the game console market that you start to see the aforementioned IP problems of yore. You know, the whole Halo X Gears problem and the whole exclusive problem in general that the Xbox One was plagued with. It was at this point, I'm sure, that Phil Spencer realized that if the Xbox were to grow into a larger power within the games console space, that some changes were going to have to be made, and a few of which had already been taking place. But to understand this, we gotta go back in time to the distant past of 2014.
2 hits go back.
Year is 2014. I'm in middle school at the age of 12, Elon Musk is only 37, and I am sitting in the cafeteria scrolling through Google News. When all of a sudden, I notice something. A headline pops up. It says, Microsoft has purchased Minecraft. And to 12-year-old me, this is a big deal, and let me explain why. Back then, and even today, the general consensus seems to be that If a franchise or game dev is bought by a publisher, that thing becomes an exclusive thing to that publisher's platform. Sony owns the broadcasting rights to any form of Spider-Man related entertainment, and Microsoft has the same rights to Halo. This is why Spider-Man PS4 will never be on an Xbox, and also why Halo 3 will never grace a PlayStation with its presence. It makes sense, it drives console sales in both directions, and it divides the crowd. But Minecraft was different in the fact that it was pretty much universally loved. It was considered to be one of the greatest games out there, and for Microsoft to swoop in and possibly yank the Minecraft-themed rug out from under anyone not on a Microsoft device, which at this point was anything other than a Windows Phone, PC, or Xbox, would have just been terrible for Microsoft's PR. And it was because of this risk to their public relations that nothing was done. Microsoft agreed to oversee the game's future and its further development, and not much else. I mean, they added microtransactions and shit, but that wasn't until recently, and at least I can play on my iPod. And things continued along this same comfortable path until the year 2018 rolled around, with the whole Games Pass thing. At this point, Game Pass is not only popping off in terms of selling consoles, but actually making moves in the console space, i.e. making exclusives actually worth something again. Let me explain for the third time. First off, what is Game Pass? Game Pass is a monthly subscription service that gives you access to a catalog of games for you to stream off of the cloud, and more importantly, it's the only excuse you get when debating Sony versus Microsoft, at least today. Long story short, you give Microsoft money, and you get to have games. And yeah, sure, Microsoft could pay a company to have the publishing rights to a game and then put it on Game Pass, but that costs a lot of money, and it's just not permanent. So when they try to add games to Game Pass, they're stuck in a less than ideal situation. So, let's say you're Microsoft, and I present you with one of two options. You could pay a dev to sell you exclusive publishing rights to a game for like 6 years for $7, or you could buy the entire game dev in question for around $20. See where I'm getting at here? It does cost more money initially and in the short term, but you no longer have to worry about competition as much. And now you take in a large percentage of that company's profit as their main source of funding. So in 2018, when they needed exclusive games for Game Pass, instead of making them in-house, they just started buying studios and adding their entire backlog into the Game Pass library. And so it goes on. Playground Games, Ninja Theory, Compulsion, In Exile, Undead Labs, and even Obsidian Entertainment, one of my favorite game devs. They're all under the Microsoft umbrella at this point. Later, Double Fine would be added, and the wave just keeps moving. This brings us squarely to the dreadful year of 2020. For the past few months, about June or so, we started hearing rumors that Microsoft was preparing to do something huge. We just didn't know exactly who they were going to buy. Bungie would make sense, as it would go along with the single dev at a time thing that they were going with, but there were also some murmurs about WB Games being acquired, but nothing, and I mean nothing, would prepare us for this. I don't care who you were, or if your dad works at Nintendo, or in this case, Microsoft. You can't tell me that you saw this coming, because nobody did. And that price, I'm not entirely sure you understand how large a number 7.5 billion is. That's $1 million times 7,500. If a single dollar is roughly 3 by 6 square inches, then if we were to lay these dollar bills side by side, it would cover over 2,130,682 square miles of land, or for you European folk, 3,429,001 square kilometers. That's only 500 square kilometers shy of covering all of Europe, or only 1,660,308 square miles short of covering the entire United States. I know I mentioned this last week, but it's more money than they spent on Minecraft by almost double, and more money than Disney spent on Lucasfilm, Pixar, or Marvel. That's so much money! And Microsoft has got to make that back somehow, right? And how are they going to do that? Exactly. Here's my point. They gotta sell games, and more importantly, Game Pass subscriptions. We have gone over the sheer amount of games in the ZeniMax library before. I did last week, and so I'm not gonna skim through it here, but essentially the value of the Fallout franchise, the Elder Scrolls franchise, and Doom, and Quake, and everything else is incredible. Simply put, Doom is a Game of the Year contender. Every single time a new game is released, people talk about it, and if that weren't enough, they've got Bethesda now. Any fan of Western RPGs and shady business practices knows exactly what I'm talking about. I own 3 copies of Fallout New Vegas, 3 copies of Fallout 3, and 2 copies of Skyrim's. These are games that they just churn out and resell to people on every single console. There is no question about that. Fallout 76 was a garbage fire, but that garbage fire still sold 1.8 million copies in 2018 alone. And it is because this fame, or infamy depending on who you ask, that ZeniMax was purchased by Microsoft in the first place. Oh yeah, there's also Game Pass! Over the course of the last 6 months, either because of COVID or in spite of it, Game Pass sales are up over 50%. No matter how you slice that, that is some ridiculously positive growth for Microsoft and the Xbox team on the front of Game Pass. And in an effort to keep this train of growth chugging along, choosing to soak up these games that I have bought like 170 times and will continue to buy again and again and again on every platform until the day I die would make quite a bit of sense. Because now, all of a sudden, I don't have to buy multiple copies for different platforms. And because Game Pass is like at most $15 a month, you can make an estimate that Microsoft is making roughly $1.8 billion yearly on Game Pass subscriptions alone. That is, of course, if we go with that 15 million subscriber amount that was given to us. Now, if you know what you're talking about, that might seem minuscule in the grand scheme of things, as we are literally talking about Microsoft, a company that is literally worth $1.3 trillion. Keep in mind, people, that trillion is 1 million, 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 million. That's a number that is so large that I couldn't explain it if I had all day. It is a number that the human mind cannot comprehend. So yeah, an income of less than 0.1% of the company's worth doesn't seem like a whole lot, but hear me out. Microsoft is super big. It's a complex and, most importantly, diverse company. They make not only the Xbox, but also the world's single most popular operating system. They make the Office suite, they make business products and Zoom, and their cloud services are used legit by everyone from the United States government to Sony themselves. It's their most profitable facet of business. But Xbox, where it used to be a dusty old hobby, is still never turned a profit on anything to this day. But that said, it's kind of essential. Over the course of the pandemic, console gaming revenue has soared, and Xbox has right along with it. Now, it is dumb hard to find concrete numbers, but while they have been bleeding money, if this trend of platform growth decides to stick around, that could very well change. But that, my friends, is a topic we will cover in a different video. I'm doing away with addendums for padding at the end of every video from here on out, so if you want to know more about anything regarding my progress from here on out, check out my Twitter for updates, go check out last week's video, and probably the one before that as well if you are missing any context for this one, because they're kind of like mandatory prerequisites. Or, you know, don't, because, I mean, hey, no one cares.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!